Medrash Rabbah says that Moshe Rabbeinu was told on Sinai that the Jews had created the Egel. He doesn't break the luchos until he goes down and sees for himself. Medrash asks why he waited. The Medrash says that if a dayan, it's to be instructive for dayanim, for future generations. That here there was no question of a lack of credibility. He heard from the Rabbi Shalom. But it's to teach future deiros that when there is a possibility that a dayan can see for himself, he should wait until he actually witnesses the particular aveira, so that he can respond to it on another level. There's an etziv in Parshas in Breishis. The etziv says on Vayara Shem Ki Tov that the Rebbeinu Shalom implanted into vision the ability to see, even though there it's talking about the Riyah Kaviyochel of the Rebbeinu Shalom, which is not biological vision, but it's again using that terminology to teach us something. The Rebbeinu Shalom implanted in Riyah something that doesn't exist in the other senses, and that is a capacity to internalize, to be nispoil. We internalize and we act upon it. V'horaya, says the Netziv, that Moshe Rabbeinu heard on Sinai that the Rebbeinu Shalom told him, made the egel, but he doesn't break the luchos until he sees for himself. He's nispoil when he sees it for himself. So says the Netziv. The Sforna on the spot says, Moshe Rabbeinu, as it were, was missing a piece of data. He heard they made the egel, but he didn't know they were doing it, the tupim, the mecheles, they were singing and dancing it with simcha. And says the Sforna, anything that is executed, it's expedited, the simcha, then it becomes internalized. And if it's internalized, the only way to expunge it, to extricate it from the person, is to traumatize them. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw now that they were doing it with simcha, he had to shock them, traumatize them by breaking the luchos. Interestingly enough, this Sforna is brought by many Sifrei Chassidus as a raya to the upside of simcha that one internalizes it. In this instance, it was a negative experience, but it could be positive. Simcha helps something become internalized. There's a tshuva from Reb Moshe, very, very fascinating tshuva. He's talking about the shaila of Bikur Cholim over the telephone, whether or not somebody's not there. But I'll go upon him, during the tshuva over there, in the process of the interaction with the shail and his tshuva, there's a Sefer Ikrim that's quoted that says something similar to what the Netziv says. Sefer Ikrim says that the experiencing, witnessing it, adds another dimension and brings a raya from Moshe Rabbeinu. And Reb Moshe in the tshuva says that you can't understand how it's possible to say such a thing. Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah is aspakaya me'ira. It's not through an opaque lens. It's with total and utter clarity, and he couldn't have been missing anything. It was as if he was there. So you can't say that there's more information or something that is added on later by actually witnessing for himself. Rav Moshe Feinstein applies this to the difference between being present, a bika chaylim, where somebody is nisragesh by seeing the chayla, and he davens more because of that. He uses it for the tshuva, the actual person, and that doesn't happen on the telephone. It happens by personally being there. I'll call upon him. So says Rav Moshe. So it would seem that we have a few positions here. We have a position that the Medrash indicates that there was no other reason other than to teach us that a dayan should wait till he sees for himself, which means that whatever he had to know, he knew, because that's the only reason to wait, and that's to be instructive to us for future generations. The Sforna does indicate that something was missing, the feature, the information, the data of the Simcha, and that required something. And again, that becomes a question whether or not, according to Rav Moshe, that it would seem that that couldn't be missing. The same kasha that he asks on the Sefer Ikim, he'll ask on the Sforna. There's a Chassam Sefer in Parshas Dvorim. Some Sefer brings the first few psukim where Moshe Rabbeinu identifies all the locations where he gave Teichacha to Klal Yisrael. He gave the Teichacha, Midbatzin, Dei Zohov, Chatzeros. Each one has some pirush, some allusion, but he goes through the geography. The Medrash asks, what do we need all the geography for? What difference does it make to us? Okay, so one tshuva would seem to be, it's not just geography, because there are levels of meaning that are being communicated with each name. But so asks the Medrash. Possibly there could have been another way of doing it without spreading it across locations. Answers the Medrash, because there were those people Moshe Rabbeinu is going to give Teichacha. And if he gives Teichacha, he's going to get their dander up, as they say. There's going to be a reaction. And they're going to want to dismiss the Teichacha. And one way to dismiss it is saying, he's an old man, senile, he's out of it. So in order to anticipate, to ambush that possible rebuttal to the rebuke, Moshe Rabbeinu says, this happened here, this happened there. He shows them that he's functioning at optimal level. To anticipate that problem. So asks the Medrash and answers the Medrash. Asks the Chassam Sefer, are you talking? We have psukim that teach us that Moshe Rabbeinu lo nos lecha, lo kea ena, he was, and he seems to assume that it must have been obvious if the pasuk says that he was physically in top form, that must have been evident and clear. How could there have been such a havamin that it couldn't have gotten started, such a timer, such a disclaimer? Says the Chassam Sefer, we have a machlekes between the Babli and the Yerushalmi on whether or not the Bekiya Le'ir, the breaking into the city, was on 17th of Tammuz and Bayis Rishon. Bayis Sheni, that's what it was. According to the Babli, quotes the Psukim in Yirmiyahu, it was on Tes, the breaking into the city. That was, Bayis Sheni is Yud Zayin. We're closer to the tragedy of Bayis Sheni, so we fast Bayis Sheni. The Tur even brings that a Bal Nefesh Yachme al Atzmai, that there is an inyan to fast on Tes as well, but we don't put two consecutive Tainesim on the Tzibur with such close proximity. Tesis brings the Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi says, no, Bayis Rishon was also on Yud Zayin. The Pasuk says, Tes, says the Yerushalmi, Kilkul Cheshbainis Hayakan. They got confused about the dating. The suffering, the devastation was such that they were overwhelmed. And therefore, the Navi made a mistake. As a civilian, the way I understand the Chassam Sofer's explanation of the Yerushalmi is that at the moment of truth, the Navi knew that it had been a mistake. But the Rebbeinu Shalom was mitzaveh to him to be mansiach, put it down for Davis, that even it should be a testimony to how bad the suffering was, that even somebody of the caliber of Yirmiyahu Navi could be so confused from all the suffering tragedy that he witnessed. Machlekes Babli and the Yerushalmi. And, continues the Chassam Sofer, Im Ken, this is what the Medrash is teaching us. The Medrash is saying, surely Moshe Rabbeinu was in top physical form, and it was evident, it was clear, anybody that met him thought he was young. But since there would be a future Navi, Yirmiyahu would get confused by witnessing all of the tragedy that he lived through. Moshe Rabbeinu was privy to everything that would happen to Klal Yisrael throughout the Deiros. Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni, the Inquisition, Meneki, all the pogroms lemineihem, the Shoah, Hakol, Bikol, Kol. Moshe Rabbeinu saw it all. And if Moshe Rabbeinu saw it all, then one might have a havamina that he'd get confused. Komash Malon, that no, he didn't get confused. That's what the Medrash is teaching you. Though Yirmiyahu in the future would get confused, Moshe Rabbeinu did not get confused. Ask the Chassam Sofer, or Gufa Kasha, how come Yirmiyahu would get confused and Moshe Rabbeinu did not get confused? Chassam Sofer answers that Moshe Rabbeinu also witnessed the Geula. He saw the light at the other end of the tunnel. Yirmiyahu knew there would be it, but he didn't have an equal experience of Nevuah, of seeing the Geula. Moshe Rabbeinu, there was an equation. Whatever tragedy he saw, he also witnessed the ultimate Geula. And therefore he didn't get confused. So asks the Chassam Sofer and answers the Chassam Sofer. The question we should ask is, there would seem to be a more elementary, basic answer to the difference between Yirmiyahu's situation, his getting confused by Bayis Rishon, and Moshe Rabbeinu's not getting confused by seeing all the tragedies that would unfold in Jewish history. Yirmiyahu was living through it. Moshe Rabbeinu witnessed it by Nevuah. And perhaps we could differentiate between the reality, the experiential reality of living through it, where one is impacted on one level, as opposed to merely seeing it by Nevuah. The Chassam Sofer does not give that teretz, which indicates that the Chassam Sofer holds that Moshe Rabbeinu's experience of Asbakaya Meira is the equivalent of living through it. And that's why he comes on and gives the teretz of that it's not, it was the seeing the Geula, that saved Moshe Rabbeinu from getting confused. If so, then it's clear that the Chassam Sofer holds that Aspakarya Me'ira is exactly the same as living through it. Otherwise, he should have used that as the difference between Yirmiyahu and Moshe Rabbeinu. That means that he would not say what the Sefer Ikrim says, and he would not say what the Netziv says, that Moshe Rabbeinu heard there's an egel, waits till he comes down and sees for himself, and only breaks it then because he's nespoiled when he sees it. According to the Chassam Sofer, then, as according to Reb Moshe Feinstein, we would say that it means that it's the exact equivalent. That's not why Moshe Rabbeinu waited. The whole experience was identical. So we could say he waited, like the Medrash says. The Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu waited in order to be instructive for Delos, that a future Dayan, if he could see for himself, wait. Moshe Rabbeinu did not have to wait, but future Dayanim would gain something by waiting. So that's the reason. It's didactic, it's educational. There's a reason to wait. The Meshech Chochmah just wants to know why Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos. He's not dealing specifically with this question of why he waited. What was the point in breaking the luchos? Everything Moshe Rabbeinu does is instructive for Delos. The Rebbe of Kal Yisrael, Teres Moshe, everything Moshe Rabbeinu does or says is a lesson. Says the Meshech Chochmah, at the moment of the Luchos Rishonos, somehow carved by the Rebbeinu Shalom Kaviyachol miraculously, the Ksav is miraculous. There's nothing in the world that could be described as more holy at that moment, more Kodesh. Says the Meshech Chochmah, quoting the Rambam, what was the mistake of the original Ovdei Avodah Zarah? Is that they related to the Rebbeinu Shloim's structuring of the universe as if it was a corporate structure. And the Rebbeinu Shalom appointed, designated executive authority. This one's in charge of this, that one's in charge of that, because it's based on really an anthropomorphism, that thinking of the Rebbeinu Shalom in human terms, that there's a limit to how much information, how much data can be handled, and therefore there's a necessity to make divisions and departments and executives, which is a fundamental mistake. But eventually, they weren't foolish enough to think that it wasn't all initiated by this supreme intelligence, but that he created afterwards this corporate structure and delegated authority. And then eventually it becomes propitious, it becomes kidai, to ingratiate oneself with each one of these department heads because they have a certain amount of a margin to award goodies. And then they become an end in themselves. It's a slippery slope. Says Rabbi Simcha, what better way to rebut this thesis, this mistake, to think that there's anything in the Bria that is autonomous, that's self-contained, that's self-propelled? No such thing. It's mechadish betuvoi tomid kol yom ma'isa breshis. Every moment, it's being reinvented, not rediscovered, reinvented. And so, nothing holier than the luchos. Moshe Rabbeinu says, in order to impact, to dramatize This reality is going to break the holiest thing, the thing that's most kodesh, these miraculous luchas, and smash it in front of them to teach them. Would it have been a preference to go through history with luchas rishonos? Of course. But similarly, says Rabbi Simcha, it was a preference to go through history with a bias rishon, then with a bias sheni, to be in Eretz Yisrael. But Klal Yisrael will always have a contingency plan. There's a b'diavad fallback position. When somehow we fail, it's a bear market spiritually, not a bull market, and we fail, and we're in chapter 11, we can yet and will yet survive in Golus without a Beis Mikdash. What we need is the Daled Amos of Halacha. There's a contingency relationship. Without the Daled Amos of Halacha, without the Botei Midrashim, the Botei Knesiyos, we can't survive. But we can always build a Beis Medrash, whether it's in Baghdad or Cairo or in Brooklyn. We'll build a Beis Medrash, and there'll be a Daled Amos of Halacha. And so, Rabbi Simcha says that's the point of the luchos had to be broken to teach Klal Yisrael this Yesod. Now, if so, who had to witness the breaking of the luchos? Klal Yisrael. It wouldn't have been enough for Moshe Rabbeinu to break the luchos on Har Sinai. For him, he was nispoil as if he had seen it. He saw it, Asbakal Yemeira, like a Moshe, like the Chassam Sofer. But Klal Yisrael, in the Lashon of the Posik, is Meduyak le'enei Yisrael, that Moshe Rabbeinu had to smash the luchos. It had to be experiential for them. For them, there would be a difference, a gap between Riyah and Shmiyah. Moshe Rabbeinu would all coalesce, it all came together in the Asbakal Yemeira. One of the Nisim by Maimon Al-Sinai was Royem es HaKolos. Hard for us to grasp what that means, obviously, but the little glimpse that we get of it. Pardon the pun. The glimpse that we get of Royem es HaKolos. Posik says, Balaturim says, look at the Enochi of Enochi Hashem Elokecha, where there was Royem es HaKolos. One of the primary differences between Riyah and Shmiyah is that Shmiyah you experience sequentially. Shtei kolos of basachas lo nishmoyim becomes a third sound if there are two together. If A and B are sounded together, it becomes a new sound C. Riyah, we see panoramically. Medrash Yamdeinu Rambeinu on Parshas Ha'eh asks, Ma'u lo'odam shabi Yisrael lahafsik bekriyat ha'tochecha. Can you make hafsakas in the tochecha? No. Question is obvious. Why is that medrash over here? Why is the question here should be with the tochecha? Rabbi Simcha says, Mei Mariva, had Moshe Rabbeinu spoken to the seller, which Chaim HaKodesh says something very similar, it would have been a reinforcement of Royem es HaKolos. The speaking to the seller and making it deliver the water through speech would have been a reinforcement of Royem es HaKolos. And that was forfeited by hitting the rock. That's Rameh Simcha's take on Mei Mariva. And it does say, Daber sasela le'eineihem, le'einei. The question is, why should that have to go through history to be reinforced, that ness of Royem es HaKolos? But perhaps it's this medrash of Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu Can you make hafsokas in the kriya of the teichach or not? There are two ways to relate to all of the suffering of Klal Yisrael in history. Choben by Yisushin, Choben by Yisheni, the Inquisition, Hakol, Bikul, all the way through history, up until our times, including our times, unfortunately. Al tiftach peh. Shmiyadik or riyadik. You take each event in isolation, discrete happenings. Shmiyadik. Built-in isbal, can't be handled. Or you take it riyadik. You see it panoramically. It begins with a bris bein psalm, and it's going to climax with bias hagoyel. It's a talich, it's a process. Re'ei anochi, re'im asakolos, says the Medrash. That's why it's here, that we have to approach it riyadik. Times in Jewish history haven't been many, but there have been such times. In the time of Shlomo Melech, when there was a Roiv Minyan and Binyan of Klal Yisrael were fulfilling mitzvahs. Other times percentages were less. Hard to believe that there was a time when there were so few percentage-wise in the totality of Klal Yisrael. That in itself constitutes a Chillul Hashem. And frequently, the rebuttal that we hear from the naysayers is that we're out of it. We haven't been brought into the modern world. We're experiencing a cultural senility. Like the Medrash says about Moshe Rabbeinu, they wanted to say to dismiss the Teichacha. Why should we take you people seriously? You're not with it. You haven't been updated. You're still living in an archaic universe. It's the ghetto image. But then there are some who look and see a certain healthiness in our tzibur. Lo nos leicha, lo kea einai. There's a certain healthiness here. Another difference of Riyah and Shmiya is Shmiya, I have to be close. Ma efshar letzapot, was kann man schon verlangen? What can you expect of somebody who was brought up in a home, he didn't hear his father daven, he didn't hear him learn, he didn't hear a kol Torah. You have to be close to him. He wasn't close. But the Ribono Shel Olam implanted in every Jewish heart the ability, the capacity to be royim as a kolos. He can see a certain healthiness, a certain vibrancy in our community. Do we have our failings? We know. Of course, we're the first ones to call attention to it. Warts and scars. But it's so incomparably better than anything else that exists, that there's a healthiness that's projected. The chesed, the family relationships. That's royim hakolos, to see that health. That's experiential. And that's ma'ira, the question. Then there's a question, fine. We open up our homes. The Torah to Eliyahu speaks about it, opening one's home, bringing them to share, to participate. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's our obligation, because there's a matziv, there's a state of Chillul Hashem out there. And we have to redress that Chillul Hashem, that Rov Minyan u Binyan u Klal Yisrael are not participating. And the vast majority, it's out of Amaratzis. And just like the Maharsha says that Anius, Chazal, the Gemara in the Dome says, Ein anim ki aniyei adas. There's no greater poverty than intellectual poverty. Says the Maharsha, most people think that it's an analogy, that just like there's economic poverty, we're extending the term to apply to intellectual poverty. Maharsha says it works the other way. The source of the term is intellectual poverty. Just that frequently somebody who is economically deprived will be in a state of poverty intellectually because he doesn't have options. He's so restricted. And when Chazal say that kol hamonea, anybody that deprives a Jew from learning a halacha, deprives means now I don't go into the Beis Medrash and take away his sefer. I don't go put a blindfold on him. It means I don't invite him into the Beis Medrash. I'm not sharing with him. The Maharsha on the spot in the Gemara and Chelek says that it's not just talking about not sharing with somebody who knows how to learn. It means if somebody says he's too far away, I can't be makal of him, that's being monea halacha from him. Because we have to position him, get him to the point. He has to be royam as a koilos. He has to hear the koilos, you have to bring him close. Ria from the Vikings, yeah. But the shmir is going to be the koilos. It's a pachad chodim. Take a look at the Loshen in the Gemara, in Chelek, Tzaddik Aleph, Amud Beis, about the responsibility of not depriving a Jew of knowing how to learn. And I'll just leave you with this. I want to take it one step further. People are out there and working in Kiruv. Is it enough? Said he's going to be a Shomer Shabbos. Said he's going to daven. He's going to keep kashrus. It's wonderful. Major breakthrough. But why is that less if this candidate could become a Ben Torah and he could learn how to learn? Why is that less of a monea, a dvar halocha, from a Jew? You can't force anybody to do anything. But if somebody can become more of a Ben Torah, then the quality of his life, his family life, his relationship to his children, his relationship to his Beire, is fundamentally, essentially, qualitatively different than if he's condemned to be an Amoritz. Is there a virtue? Is it to be applauded any level of Shmiras Mitzvahs? Of course. But not to be Monea. Loyem HaKolos, but then he has to hear the sounds. He has to participate. Otherwise, there's a lingering suspicion that in moments of stress, maybe there is a certain senility in this culture. Whatever I do, I get extra points for. More than required. Look how many people are not doing anything. Everybody has a Yetzer Hara. Gentlemen, any one of us today is a potential makarev, directly or indirectly. Any one of us can get somebody to the point of having a certain curiosity and admiration for who we are, royam es hakolos. But that's not enough. It's not enough. We have to get them closer wherever and however possible to know that it's kailas and that they have to be oiskim b'divrei Torah. And they have to taste the tam of a yagir. 45 years of experimentation here at Osamer, we think we're getting to do it better. Many of you will come along and introduce chidushim and help us for more chidushim and how to do it even better. But this has been established, where somebody enters into the world of Abaya and Rova and becomes integrated into that world, and he tastes the tam of Yagir B'Teira. He was not nimna, he wasn't prevented by feeling relaxed and that he can make a brocha. He had a kezayis of kiruv and exposure. He doesn't, no bracha choina. He can't. That's each individual case. But if there is such a possibility, it's incumbent upon every one of us to make it attractive, to be mare es hakolos, and as much as possible to share the exhilaration, the singular simcha that comes from Yigiyah and Torah. Batzlocho bracha.